I was 23 years old at the time and a student. I was living alone in a small apartment complex not too far away from my school. I've never liked living alone. I was also afraid of the dark. However, I always felt safe in my little apartment. It only had one way to get in, and you needed to unlock two doors to get inside. The main front door to the building and the door to my apartment. I also used to have a few lights on even at night, and my laptop was usually playing some movie until I fell asleep. I always locked my door, except for this one time. One weekend, I was out drinking with my friends, and when I was going back home, I ended up sharing a taxi with a random guy that was going to the same area as me. We both jumped out of the taxi outside my place and talked for a little while. He was about the same age as me and said that he was also a student. He walked me to my front door and we said goodnight and I went inside. Some weeks, maybe a month later, I decided to stay home that weekend. I was just watching some TV series in bed until I fell asleep. But suddenly, I woke up to a voice. I couldn't really hear what the voice was saying, but I could hear that it was a man talking. I opened my eyes and the room was dark, but I could see a shadow standing in the doorway to my bedroom. I froze. My adrenaline started pumping. I couldn't scream, I just kept staring at the figure. I thought that I must be dreaming, that it has to be a nightmare. But I understood quickly my biggest fear had come true. He stopped talking and I asked quietly, "Who are you?" He took a step closer and whispered, "Don't you remember me?" He was clearly drunk, but I suddenly could see that it was the same guy I shared a taxi with some weeks ago. I felt some weird, a feeling of relief that I had recognized him, but at the same time I was horrified. My thoughts had started spinning. What did he want? Why was he here? I didn't know what to do. There's no place to run or to hide to. My first thought was to try and stay calm, so I just asked quietly what he was doing here. "I was thinking about you," he said and continued. "I turned off your lights and closed your laptop." He smiled. I kept looking at him. I was still in my bed and I still didn't know what to do. I felt sick of the thought of him walking around my apartment while I was sleeping, but decided that I would continue to stay calm. I asked him how he got into my building. He said that he had been ringing my doorbell, but I didn't open. So he tried my neighbor's doorbell and someone had opened it for him. He also went into my neighbor's apartment but realized that it wasn't mine. He then saw my name at the door and went in. I think he could see the fear in my eyes. He suddenly turned around and said, "I think I should go." He stumbled out and I went after him. Right before he left, he said, "You should really lock your door." I shut the door in his face and locked it. I went back to bed and cried. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I never called the police, but I told my friends the next day. The following months, someone would ring my doorbell every now and then in the middle of the night. I would get an anxiety attack every time. I never opened up, but I had a feeling that it could be him. I never saw the guy again. This story happened about 2 years ago when I was 19, and my foster sister Kira was 16. For the sake of the story, it's important to know that I was female presenting and hadn't come out as trans yet, nor was I presenting myself in an overtly masculine style at the time. It was the summer before I was going to college, and I mostly lived with my mom and Kira except for every other weekend, where I'd stay with my dad. Now, summers where I am can get really hot and humid, so we had a habit of waiting to walk the dogs until about 6 or 7 p.m., because that's when it would be cooler but still light outside. On this particular evening, Mom wasn't going to be home until late, though I don't remember the exact reason why. She is a woman that likes to stay busy and often participates in choirs, Bible studies, youth group events, classes, and more. so it wasn't uncommon for Kira and I to be left home alone until about 8 or 9 p.m. at night. So it was up to me and Kira to walk the dogs by ourselves, unless we wanted our younger dog, Samson, to throw tantrums due to pent-up energy. Even though we lived in the countryside and could have walked them down our street, Kira and I decided to drive out 20 minutes to a park instead. Why, I don't remember. It could have been anything from being bored walking our roads to not wanting to have to deal with blind curves and hills. Whatever the reason, at around 7:30 p.m., Kira and I had harnessed our 2 dogs, packed them up in the car, and drove to the park. Now let me quickly explain the layout of the park so that it's easier to understand why we got nervous halfway through our walk. This park isn't very big, but it's popular because of its loop. The entire park is surrounded by a mile-long looping road with its attractions, like playgrounds, ponds, and a small country hall, spaced about on the inner side of the loop. The outer side is just grass, trees, and one playground at its end. Thus, it's common and expected to pass people walking the loop at least 2 times if you're walking in opposite directions, but not if you're walking in the same direction, obviously. Many cars on this road can only drive in one direction because it's a one-way road. At first, everything about this walk seemed normal. I parked the car, we clipped our dogs to leashes, and we started on the loop. Every so often, we'd stop so I could take pictures of our good boys, particularly of Kira trying to wrangle Samson, who pulls like his life depends on it, and weaves around cause he wants to smell everything. It was while I was taking one of these pictures that the first encounter had happened. A man who looked to be in his 40s had walked past us, walking the same direction that we were, up towards the playground on the outer side of the loop. We smiled at Kira and nodded, said hello or cute dogs or something like that, and kept walking. I honestly didn't think anything of it. We're at a park at a time of day where it's common to walk around due to the cooler temperature, and people where I am are generally friendly. Smiling and saying hi is pretty normal, no matter who says it. We smiled back, maybe said hi or thanks depending on what he said, and that was that. Or so we thought. The man passed us again only about 10 minutes later, and directly across from where we had seen him previously, just like he did before. He smiled and said, hi. This time Kira and I looked at each other once he was ahead of us and stared. Well, that was weird, that kind of expression. Just 10 minutes earlier, he had passed us walking up towards the playground, and subsequently broke off from the loop, and he had been walking in the same direction as us. This time, though, he had cut in front of us, and he did it in a way where we had to stop to avoid running into him. Heck, he nearly touched Kira with how close he was walking. That was already weird in and of itself. The other weird part of him cutting past us in the opposite direction. The only way he could have done that was if he had cut across the inside of the loop, since it would have been close to impossible to pass us at a certain point from the other direction if he had decided to walk the opposite way of the loop than us. It came off almost like he wanted to walk by us again. But just like before, Kira and I brushed this weirdness off. The guy could have been enjoying a rambling stroll and done his own thing for all we knew. And besides, we had 2 reasonably sized dogs with us. Who would mess with us? Not even 5 minutes later, this man passed us again. Once again, and cutting so close past us that he nearly brushed shoulders with Kira. Again, he smiled and said hi before walking off. This was officially the moment that I decided we needed to leave. Sure, it's normal to pass a person at least 2 times walking this loop, if you're going in opposite directions, but doing so takes a while. You have to at least get to the parallel spot on the loop from where your paths first intersected to see each other again. Both the time between running into the guy and the location that we had passed each other didn't match up in a way that didn't look suspicious. Plus, I really wasn't a fan of how he cut across us. The first time he passed us like a normal person walking faster than us would, albeit a little close. The second time he had cut in front of us from the opposite direction instead of walking around us, to the point that we had to stop to avoid running into him. This third time he walked up behind us, and then he did this weird directionally slant walk across the street and go in the opposite direction, cutting us off again. So yeah, I told Kira to hustle so we could get to our car and get out instead of doing a second loop, so that's what we did. When we were almost to our car, we noticed a car creeping along behind us. We pulled to the side and stopped to let it pass, but for a second it stopped too. We figured that the car was getting ready to park, so we started walking again. The car started creeping along behind us soon after we did, so we stopped again and the car stopped with us. This was when Kira got nervous. We hadn't seen the middle-aged guy since the third cutoff, so we figured that I had overthought the whole thing. But here we were, with this tinted windowed car acting weird as heck behind us. Was it the same guy but back in his car? A different guy? We couldn't tell. Before anything could happen though, another car idled up to the one next to us, and whoever it was sped up to the expected 5 miles per hour. We got to our car pretty fast after that and practically picked up the dogs to get them inside of it. We got in and got out of there. My mistake, however, was neglecting my rearview mirror and the well-advised rule not to drive straight home if you're worried a stranger's taking too much interest in you. I was anxious, dumb, and primarily concerned with getting home where we could be safe. Because home is supposed to be safe, right? My naive, false sense of security. I think we got home around 8-something. The sun had finally disappeared behind the horizon, but it wasn't fully dark yet. Just that dusty purple color the sky gets before it finally accepts that it's nighttime. Mom wasn't home yet, so we got the dogs some water, locked the doors, ate a late dinner, and chilled in the living room, talking about things that didn't really matter. It was almost 9:30 when the scariest part of this whole ordeal had happened. There, Kira and I were sitting on different couches, talking about something or other when we noticed the ceiling briefly light up over where Kira was sitting. An important note here is that Kira was sitting on a small couch with her back to a window that faces out to the front of our house, while I was on a couch on the opposite wall, where I could see a sliver of the front porch. Likewise, right next to Kira was our front door, which has 3 small rectangular windows on it. Due to our long and slightly curvy driveway, it's common to see headlights stream through that window, light up the ceiling, fade, and then intensify. It means that somebody is just coming home. So when the ceiling above Kira lit up, we thought nothing of it, assuming Mom had finally come back from wherever she went that night, and we didn't take any notice of the light skipping the final arc of someone pulling all the way up the driveway either. We also didn't pay any mind to how long it was taking Mom to come inside. Mom had a habit of pulling in and then checking her phone for God knows how long before coming inside. Right after the light went off, we both heard the storm door open, but we didn't hear anyone pressing the code keys of her lock or jiggling the door handle, like Mom usually does right away. The moment the storm door creaked open, our 2 dogs jumped up and ran to the door, barking like mad. Our golden greyhound mix, Calvin, has a deep, scary bark, which contradicts his adorable appearance. Samson, our dumb goofball son who was incapable of hurting a fly but a big boy, jumps up on his hind legs and scrambles to find purchase on one of the small windows in a desperate attempt to see who's outside. Immediately, the storm door slammed shut, and we heard heavy footsteps on the cement porch. Calvin started going nuts and jumped up on Kira's couch, standing on its back instead of the cushions to look out the window. Samson ran out of the room and went out of the doggy door that leads to the back porch, which has a ramp going down into a fenced-off portion of our yard. I couldn't move. I had never understood really what it meant when people described their limbs turning to lead until that moment. It felt like I didn't have limbs, really. Like moving wasn't an option. If I moved, I might glimpse something or someone through the windows. The person could see me running around the house, freaking out, and decide to come after us after all. So I sat there, my mind steadily going blank as my heart sped up, and my limbs refused to move. In the game of fight, flight, or freeze, I'm the freezer. And Kira, on the other hand, is a fighter. She spins around and looks out the window but can't see anything because, besides the emotion light on the porch, it's too dark. So naturally, she gets up and grabs a stray dog toy, which just so happens to be a tug-of-war rope with a ball on one end, and opens the door. I tell her very calmly to shut the door and stay inside, but she ignored me and stepped out onto the porch. She comes back inside after not saying anything, but to my utter disbelief, she disappears to the kitchen, comes back with a knife and goes outside again. This time she's gone for a handful of seconds before running back inside and slamming the door shut. Breathless, she tells me that she went on a bit into the yard and saw the outline of a man by the rundown dog kennel that we don't use anymore. When she saw him and froze, he moved. This time she listened to me when I told her to lock the door. I managed to call Mom despite my head being empty and my limbs being lead, and she convinced me to get up, make sure that all the doors were locked, including the basement, and making sure that the dogs were inside. I ended up making Kira go into the fenced-up section to drag Samson back inside, because I couldn't get my legs to move after thinking about doing it myself. Cowardly, I know. After Mom got home and looked around, finding nothing, we called the non-emergency number for the police, not wanting to bother them in case we were overreacting. 2 cops came by and walked around our yard and found nothing. We got the sense they didn't believe us, but instead saw us as 2 overexcited girls with exaggerated imaginations. But still, they humored us and told us, after we had told them about the park, that if we think that anyone might be following us or if someone's acting a little too creepy, not to drive straight home and to check if anyone's following us. And then they laughed. To this day, I'm pretty sure the only people who believe someone with malicious intent came to our home in hopes of finding 2 teenage girls is Kira and me. Though whether or not whoever it was the guy from the park, we're not sure. But it's too coincidental, isn't it? That the day that we have multiple encounters with this guy, who goes out of his way to get close to us and a car inch-long behind us, we also have an almost intruder encounter. Plus, there were too many details that didn't add up to us having overly excited imaginations. We both saw headlights. The motion detector on the porch had turned on. The storm door had opened and stayed open until Samson had jumped up to look out the door's window. It's a very noisy door and makes sounds when opening and closing. We had heard footsteps. Kira had saw someone. And the dogs don't run up to the door like that and bark their heads off if no one's there. I don't know if whoever was at our house was the same guy that ran into us at the park. If it was, I don't know if the reason he cut in front of us as close as he did was to test how our dogs would react to him, and then not caring at all there the first time, wagging their tails convinced him that they weren't a threat. I don't know if he was in the car that inched behind us and stopped when we stopped. I don't know what would have happened if Calvin didn't have a scary manic bark, or if Samson wasn't tall enough to look out the high windows on the door. I don't know much of anything. What I do know is this: if you're out and about, minding your own business, and a stranger is taking a lot of notice of you, following you, frequently running into you, or whatever, trust your gut. Don't drive or walk straight home, meander, get to a public space, or just take your time. Pay attention to your surroundings. You never know who's watching you.